Welcome to another edition of Red Star over Sheffield. I'm Roger McKenzie, and we've been doing these discussions, these conversations all week during the Cultures in Resistance gathering at Wortley Hall, which is in South Yorkshire, in England. And all the way through the week, it's really been about the different kind of contributors towards bringing all these activists together, and no more so than Manifesto Press, who are not only the producers of this podcast alongside Red Star Media, supported by the Morning Star and so on. But no more is that more the case than Manifesto Press. And the founder, the chair of Manifesto Press is Nick Wright. Nick, welcome, comrade. It's really good to be able to spend a bit of time with you. Me and Nick go so far back, and Nick kind of described to somebody this week that he knew me when I was a slaphead, and I just thought, yeah, well, he actually did. It's really hard to kind of argue against that, really. But Nick, thanks, mate. It's really good to be able to get a bit of a time with you. So tell me about Manifesto Press. Where did it come from? What was the idea?
It came out a couple of decades ago, really, in which a group of us, mostly in the labour movement and the solidarity movements, thought that we needed to find a publishing platform, really, because there are a number of books that needed publishing, essentially. And among the first was Andrew Murray's book on the Empire Deniers, if you like. And we did one by Rob Griffiths on the 1911 railway strike, and that led to books about Cuba and education, which we did with a group of teachers. And the thing took shape as a publishing enterprise that was designed to serve the labour movement and the progressive movement generally. And gradually it took on a character anti-imperialist, certainly engaged with the liberation movements, particularly women's liberation and against colonialism and imperialism, for peace, and this range of questions. So people began to come to us with publishing ideas that they either couldn't get a mainstream publisher to publish, or they couldn't afford to publish themselves, or they want access to expertise. And we had a group of people, mostly fairly young at the time, who had design skills, publishing skills, organizational skills. And so it emerged as a publishing enterprise that both did stuff in its own name and commissioned people, but with limited resources. And then it became a service organization, really, so people in the labour movement would come to us, and individuals as well, families. Say, my granddad, who was in the general strike, had things they wanted to say, so he wrote this autobiography. So we try and find ways of helping people. And eventually we finished up with a pretty substantial reservoir of people with publishing, design, organisational skills, and a fair back catalogue. We did a lot of stuff for the Socialist Education Association, the Connolly Association, with teachers group, particularly the National Union of Teachers, and there became a sort of a tradition that when they sent delegations of teachers to Cuba or other places, they'd come back and then we'd publish a book of their reminiscences. So it was a kind of that kind of operation. A lot of clients, I suppose we could call them, from the trade union movement, trades councils generally. And we did a few books in which groups of trade unions or groups of trade unionists found the money to get something published. So we were a non-profit, but we did begin to accumulate not only a bit of credibility, but a sort of body of experience and a bit of money to function as it functioned.
But also, I think, I mean, it seems to me, and maybe I'm biased because I'm one of your writers as well, but also, a reputation for quality as well, I think, because that's certainly what I saw before I became a writer was that, because it's easy to think, well, they put it together on a shoestring, so isn't the quality's not going to be very good. But actually, nobody could say that about Manifesto Press work, it seems to me.
But to be frank, the quality to begin with was uneven. I mean, I was trained as a graphic designer, um, and one of the things I learned, my graphic design tutor was a guy who established the style for Penguin Press, for
Mm,
Penguin Books, was the necessity for branding to be consistent
mm,
and for design standards to be a fairly high level. So
mm,
that became a sort of motif. Um, and gradually we assembled a group of editors, designers, and people with the kinds of practical experience that could make a project happen. So it was a collaborative working, and I think the quality of the writing improved, or rather the quality of the editing
mm,
improved. And I mean, one of the things I've been struck by is how cooperative our writers are. I mean, we published today Hilary Kay, the second
second
edition
edition,
of
yeah.
Hilary Kay's book about the miners' strike when she was deep in the
Mm,
heart of the miners' union, and she brings with a great clarity and
mm,
precision of mind her recollections of these times. But we've done stuff from the railway unions, we've done stuff from trades councils, and we've done over the recent years, as the team has expanded and the thing has become much beyond simply a publishing project, but has become a kind of center for radical ideas and for radicalizing. Um, I think we can safely say that we've made our mark, and there's a benchmark of quality both in
mm,
the writing and in the quality of the production. And I mean, perhaps uh, the best production values we have are the Hans Hess books. That's been
mm, mm,
a really important project for us that stands at the point where politics, history, and culture intersect in a way that helps explain much of what's going on in the world today.
mm. I remember all those years ago, I mean, those early 1990s when we first met, I always remember being struck by the way that you and other comrades that I was meeting were always kind of really pushing this idea that it's not just about theory, but it's about turning theory into practice.
Mm.
And one of the things that really kind of impresses me, I suppose, about Manifesto Press is is there's always a discussion taking place about how we can use the books that are produced,
Mm.
that are published by MP. So it's not just well, we'll sell books, and obviously that's what we have to do, get as many books into as many hands as possible. But what's the next stage in terms of getting people to actually do something and kind of act on
Mm.
what these really kind of books that you can't you're not seeing anywhere else, I don't think, the sort of things that Manifesto Press are producing, but getting people to turn theory into practice. I mean, and maybe one part of that is perhaps looking at some of the new opportunities for doing that exist, so like these podcasts,
Mm.
which is another way of getting into the hands of people, I
Mm.
suppose. I mean, was that sat and thought about, or was it?
It kind of happened organically. I mean, although print is not the only way in which you get ideas across, particularly today, it actually is a foundation for a lot of what goes on. I mean, it's in establishing decent design standards, for instance, that feeds into our social media output and all the rest of it. But the principle that we're there to serve a movement is reflected in our practice, which is people come to us, we provide as much as we can in the way of help and support to bring their set of ideas embodied in a book to a wider public. And so there's that dynamic and dialectical relationship
mm,
with our audiences who are also, in a sense, our clients, you know.
mm,
Um, so we have a kind of solidarity relationship with them. And so projecting ideas becomes more than a publishing project, it becomes a social product, uh, a social mechanism. And I think um, as we've matured and grown more experienced and brought on many more people, including young people who, you
mm,
know, in some cases were barely born when
mm,
we started, we're really able to capitalize on all of the of opportunities that are available. And one of the first things we did, we digitalized all our back catalogue. And now our stuff is produced always in the context in which there's promotional videos, there's podcasts with authors, there's feedback from the audiences. And you can see that each book now becomes embedded in a social network in which political action is one of its dimensions, but also elaborating a kind of approach to politics in which uh, obviously class and discrimination are key elements, but we're really interested in promoting an active engagement with politics rather than a kind of intellectual standoff. You know, our political practice is to make things happen, and
mm.
publishing books and our social media output is just part of that process.
I mean that kind of leads me on to this gathering that we're in this week, really.
Mm,
And I've deliberately tried, I think I've slipped up a couple of times, but I've tried deliberately not to call it a conference or a seminar because it's not. It's much more than that. You've got all these activists from actually, in some cases, thousands of miles away coming to Wortley Hall
mm,
to spend some time to look at how we can turn how we can create these kind of cultures in resistance, maybe cultures of resistance, even. Um, I mean, was that part of the thinking as well? I mean, was that a kind of? I'm just wondering about the genesis of the idea,
yeah,
really.
I mean, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth for this kind of thing, and because I was brought up in a labour movement tradition where, um, there's a certain style and formality to the way in which you conduct your affairs, and that's got a lot of strengths. Um, but what struck me about this last week is the way in which conventions have been subverted,
Mm,
but they've been subverted without a kind of plan. They've been subverted by the fact that when you get this diverse range of people together, we've had people from Indonesia and Germany here, for instance, and South Africa.
mm,
There's the kind of fusion of ideas you get there has been quite unpredictable, really. And I mean, we just had a discussion today on the relationship between art and propaganda, and it took place in the context of a trade union, a hall in the building named after Unite the Union, because they helped create it. But hanging on the wall was a fantastic tapestry produced by one of the groups who are participating in the event, that draws on visual and literary traditions from Latin America, from the Far East, from Indonesia, visually striking, figurative,
mm,
not abstract, but you can see how the figures are abstracted in many
mm,
ways. Immensely complex visually and
mm,
reflecting an immensely complex set of histories and experiences, and that's been expressed also in the discussions and in the encounters. So it's been a much more dynamic event than I anticipated. I thought, well, you're going to be 4 or 5 days in Wortley Hall, which is a labour movement institution, which, I
mm,
mean, I've been coming here for donkey's years,
mm. Yeah,
actually,
me too.
for
Yeah.
for various things, and I've been really impressed, but refreshed
mm,
by the way in which this has emerged as a sort of multicultural event in which the politics has emerged as praxis, as the increasing sophistication of ideas and the directness of them. You know, uh, there's been a whole range of cultural experiences this week, and every one of them had a powerful underlining political theme.
mm,
And to see the relationship between politics, culture, and ideology expressed in a way that has involved several generations. I mean, one of the most impressive things I found during the course of the week was the um, banner and flag making
mm,
projects of the kids here.
yeah,
I thought to myself, there's a amazing directness, energy, and political insight in the
yeah,
stuff that they're producing. The sort of flags, banners, emblems, uh, uh, immensely creative artwork, but showing a kind of a young generation that is tuned into uh, cultural currents that have a political essence, with the theme of liberation. I think is
mm.
probably the best way of talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to the tutors in who've been doing part of that kind of um, banner making
Yeah.
of, and it's and it really was inspiring. Really was inspiring. You're seeing this stuff going on. You're thinking, when you've got this picture of all of these young kids going to marches for years and years, and actually just being given somebody else's banner to carry or placard or whatever,
Mm.
and actually they're now. Yeah, these will go away and think, if I'm going on a demonstration, I will make my own.
I I'll tell you one thing which strikes me is that, I mean, I've been going on demonstrations since the year dot. I mean, my mum and dad took me on demonstrations when I was a kid. Um, and traditionally, a demonstration would be a multitude of banners with half a dozen or a dozen people behind the banner, the
Yeah,
stalwarts of
yeah,
the
yeah.
movement, really, taking their branch banner or their group on a march, um, and proudly displaying their banners. And there's a great tradition of banner design, which is perhaps a subject of a separate discussion. But when you go on a demonstration now, I was struck by this with the anti-racist
Mm,
demonstration and by the kind of Palestine demonstrations over the last few years, is that when you go on a demonstration now, it's not a banner with a few people behind it and another banner. What it is a multitude of people,
mm,
and within it there will be banners. Um, Now, partly this is because the organisations are mobilising more people,
mm,
but partly it's because the issues are mobilising more people,
yeah,
and so they come there self-organised in blocks. And I know, for instance, I live in a small market town in Kent, Faversham, but we sent a half a trainload of people to the anti-racist demonstration.
mm,
That was inconceivable,
mm,
10 years ago or a generation ago. Things are really on the move in our country,
mm,
and it's people acting in their own interest and in the context of a deepening political crisis. And that's one of the reasons why I think Manifesto Press has an increasing relevance.
yeah. And I've seen this been part of the discussion this week quite often about how um, we need to tell our own stories. We don't need other people to represent us really or represent our views, and some of that can still be collective. It doesn't
Mm,
have to be just your kind of I'm right and you're wrong individual kind of thing. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is that people want to be able to express themselves as part of our movement. And for me, when I go on the Gaza demonstrations, for example,
mm,
I'm seeing literally tens of thousands of people who have never been on a march before of any kind.
mm,
So they're not used to this whole idea of, well, we'll march behind a banner kind of thing.
mm,
So they bring their own,
mm,
and they're producing their own. And I think what we're seeing is something really different
mm,
at the moment. And what I also see is Manifesto Press tuning into that kind of change and thinking about what it is that we, and I absolutely identify as being, part of Manifesto Press, how we can do something that is reflecting that kind of change and practical change that I think's taking place. So that kind of leads me to the last question I wanted to ask, really, which is about the future. Nothing stands still. I mean, what are you? Have you had some thoughts about the future for Manifesto Press and where it's going, where you would like to see it going?
If we talk about the way in which a political crisis is reflected in the mobilisation of people, what we see is um, enormous numbers of people, particularly young people, coming into action. They come equipped with their own experiences, and some of their experiences point them in the direction of radical action. Um, and this is an enormous new audience for the kind of stuff we do. But within that, there is now emerged a trend of opinion which we can say is objectively anti-imperialist, in the sense it's got a developed understanding of the way the world is and what needs to be done. And this interacts with a broader mass of people who are mobilised on the issues.
Mm.
So there's two things going on there. And one of our jobs is to sort of help mobilise masses of people at the same time as develop a more conscious core. I mean, this is a revolutionary political project, and
Mm.
and we exist within a network of organisations that play a role in that process. And so I think Manifesto Press really, in one sense, need to subordinate itself to the movement, but in another sense, it has to be part of the leadership of it. So the kind of books we commission, the kind of books we publish, are designed now to reach a much broader audience than they would have been when we were founded 20 years ago. And so, and one aspect of that is the way in which the labour movement is the point at which all these different strands of activity begin to be fused. And so what we're seeing now is a new political situation in which the old institutions of politics and the old parties of politics are
Mm.
breaking down,
Mm.
new sets of problems emerging. And that in this new movement, there's a real need for political direction, for uh, development of progressive ideology, to be armed with the facts, and to be a forum for the discussion. You know, that Brecht quote, "Art is not a mirror held up to the world, but a hammer to transform it," I
Yeah.
think is
Yeah.
perhaps the way in which we conceive the relationship between culture and politics.
Yeah. Absolutely. Nick, thank you. Thanks for all you do, and for being a comrade to me for so long, even from my transition from being a slaphead to actually having hair now. But it's always been really appreciated, always. So thank you so much. Can I thank you for tuning in to all of the conversations that we've been having on Red Star over Sheffield? Can I ask you to do whatever you can to support Manifesto Press? And that means buying books and persuading other people to buy books, or buying books for other people, however it is. We need to make sure that these books get into people's hands. Can I thank you for supporting these Red Star media that where we've been working with Manifesto Press all week to produce these podcasts. Also, this is supported by the Morning Star as well. And can I ask you to please do subscribe to the Morning Star, the world's only English language socialist daily newspaper. And we really do need your support to get these messages out in a world that frankly is on fire. And the only way of putting out that fire is to build a resistance to it. And that's what this gathering this week has been partly all about, to help to build that resistance. And so please do what you can to support this movement. So thank you, stay well, stay safe, and solidarity to you all.